Hey guys, tonight we slip back through time all the way to Japan's Jomon period, wandering among its earliest settlements. Before we get too cozy, take a tiny pause to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which country are you watching from, and what's the local time there? It's always fun to imagine a sleepy global audience tuning in together, yawns and all. You open your eyes to a landscape that looks almost untouched by human hands. Mist curls over rivers like lazy smoke, and the distant hum of waves along the coastline reaches you faintly. You feel the cool morning dew underfoot as you step between low bushes and towering pines, the air filled with the scent of wet earth and salt. Birds chirp in uncertain patterns, almost like they are practicing songs for the day ahead, and somewhere, a dog-sized wild boar scurries through the underbrush. You probably won't survive this style if you tried living entirely off what's here, but for now you can wander safely in your imagination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You notice a circle of tiny smoke-stained pit houses tucked among the trees, their roofs thatched with reeds and grasses, and the earth around them packed smooth from centuries of footsteps. People move about quietly, carrying baskets, tending fires, or shaping clay into vessels that will last for centuries. The scent of cooking nuts and roasted fish drifts toward you, and a small child peers out from behind a log, shy but curious. Historians still argue whether these early settlements were strictly permanent villages or more seasonal clusters of families following food sources. You crouch to examine a clay pot half buried in soft moss, the cord-marked patterns pressed in so intricately it feels almost like a secret language. A faint crunch of shells underfoot reminds you that seafood is a mainstay here, oysters, clams, and fish drying in the morning sun. Somehow, these people seem entirely attuned to the rhythm of the land, knowing which river bend will yield salmon in spring and which grove hides chestnuts ready for gathering. You step closer to a small fire where smoke coils lazily, and a woman shakes a handful of acorns into a grinding bowl, muttering quietly to herself in the Jomon tongue. You can feel her focus, her connection to the work and the world. A curious fringe detail: some archaeologists speculate that Jomon people may have fermented nuts or grains in rudimentary ways. Imagine prehistoric kombucha, if you dare. The sun climbs slowly, spilling gold over the settlements, casting long, playful shadows. You feel the pull of curiosity as you wander, imagining stories carried by the wind, the laughter of children chasing a stray dog, and the quiet patience of elders weaving mats from reeds. As you trace the paths between houses, you notice patterns in the earth, depressions that could be fire pits, small stone arrangements that might be altars, and little mounds whose purpose remains a mystery. Some scholars suggest these may mark seasonal observances or serve as early calendars, though no one can say for sure. You lean against a tree and close your eyes briefly, letting the rhythm of the village seep in, the low murmur of water, the distant bird calls, the occasional crackle of a fire. It's the kind of morning that feels eternal, yet fleeting, like a breath you didn't know you were holding. By the time the sun reaches its mid-morning warmth, you start to notice the delicate interactions between humans and nature, baskets of berries balanced on shoulders, dogs nudging fish toward drying racks, elders instructing children in the silent art of observation. You realize that every movement, no matter how small, has a purpose shaped by generations of trial and careful attention. The Jomon settlements are alive, not just with people, but with patterns, rituals, and textures that seem to whisper from the clay walls of their homes. You take a slow breath, imagining yourself settling into one of those pit houses, the earth cool beneath you, the smoke from the fire soft against your skin. It's intimate, it's strange, it's the first chapter of a life both alien and familiar. You run your fingers over the surface of a freshly fired clay pot, feeling the tiny grooves left by the Jomon people's signature cord marking technique. It's mesmerizing, every line seems purposeful, a rhythm pressed from rope or cord while the clay was still soft, like an invisible conversation between hands and earth. The pots are not just practical containers for food and water, they're also expressive, decorative, and, in a way, social statements. You might smirk imagining someone in 3000 BC proudly showing off a pot like it's the latest smartphone. Walking past the pit houses, you notice more vessels drying near fires. Some are squat and sturdy, perfect for storing nuts or fish, while others have delicate, flaring rims, almost ceremonial. Scholars still argue whether certain exaggerated designs were purely aesthetic or served some lost ritual purpose. You crouch to inspect one rim and see faint traces of red pigment. Someone painted it for beauty, for ritual, or maybe just because it made them smile. A quirky detail you might enjoy. A few vessels from archaeological sites have tiny holes pierced along the rim, perhaps for hanging, or maybe for some long-lost game nobody has guessed yet. You shake your head and laugh softly. Some mysteries never get solved. Nearby, children attempt their own tiny clay creations, mimicking the adults, but with a wobbly charm. You notice they sometimes drag a stick over the wet clay, creating patterns you've never seen before, playful deviations that might have influenced the adult styles centuries later. Cord marking is everywhere, not just on pots, but on figurines, storage boxes, and even little clay figurines known as dogu. These small, abstract shapes sometimes resemble humans, sometimes animals, and sometimes, well, something that looks like it was sculpted after a very strange dream. Historians still debate what these figurines symbolized: fertility, protection, or just a whimsical hobby. The clay itself is earthy and cool to the touch. And as you lift a piece, you notice tiny fragments of shell and stone pressed into the walls for added strength. It's a clever technique, showing that even without modern kilns or metal tools, the Jomon people knew how to innovate. You imagine the scent of the firing process, smoky, mineral, a little like toasted bread mixed with wet earth. A fringe theory even suggests some pots were used for fermenting or brewing. Long before anyone thought to invent sake, it's intriguing but unproven. You wander closer to a small kiln, roughly circular, half buried in the earth. It's simple, efficient, and surrounded by broken shards discarded from trial and error experiments. Someone kneels beside it, pressing clay into molds, smoothing edges with a flat stone. You notice a rhythmic tapping, the almost musical sound of creation. It's easy to forget, while observing, that the Jomon period stretched thousands of years. These techniques evolved slowly, subtle refinements carried down generations. Cord marking isn't just functional, it also tells a story about identity. Different villages have subtly distinct patterns, as if the clay itself whispers, "I come from over there." You crouch, imagining archaeologists in the future digging up these shards and trying to decipher the movements, trade, and connections of these communities purely from texture and design. Some patterns are repetitive and geometric, others wildly expressive, almost like prehistoric graffiti. You grin at the thought. Humans and their desire to decorate, even before Instagram existed. You pick up a slender, elongated pot, marveling at its balance. Its surface is dotted with tiny impressions, evidence of hands, fingernails, and tools interacting with the clay. You imagine a young potter, hands stained, humming to themselves, experimenting with patterns that would outlive them by millennia. And yes, someone probably once sneezed mid-pattern, leaving a unique mark no one could replicate. Archaeologists would call that human error, but it's really just personality, preserved in clay. Stepping back, you notice a line of pots arranged near a fire for drying. Sunlight glints off their surfaces, the cords casting delicate shadows. The village moves around them in a quiet choreography. A fisherman returns with a small catch. A child runs past balancing a tiny clay bowl. Elders stir thick stews. These pots are witnesses to daily life, silent yet expressive companions that absorb centuries of hands, rituals, meals, and mischief. You run your hand over one last pot, feeling the texture, imagining the stories it holds, and you realize that even in something as simple as a bowl, the Jomon period communicated its identity, its aesthetics, and its intimate connection to the people who shaped it. You step carefully through the dappled forest light, the scent of pine needles and damp moss thick in the air, and immediately notice the abundance of life surrounding the Jomon settlements. Nuts litter the ground, acorns, chestnuts, and walnuts waiting to be gathered. Small, bright berries cling to thorny branches, and the low hum of insects mixes with distant bird calls. You bend to pick up a handful of chestnuts, feeling their smooth weight in your palm, and realize that for the Jomon people, this forest is more than a backdrop. It's a pantry, a pharmacy, and a playground all at once. Historians still argue whether some of the foraging sites were systematically managed or if they were simply exploited as needed. You follow the subtle signs, broken shells near a riverbank hinting at mussel feasts, scratched tree bark marking spots where bark was peeled for cordage, and small pits where tubers were carefully dug. It's like walking through a three-dimensional map of survival knowledge, passed from elder to child through observation, repetition, and gentle correction. You notice a young girl crouching near a root, tapping lightly with a stone to loosen the soil, humming softly as she works. A quirky detail catches your eye. Some archaeologists suggest that Jomon foragers may have intentionally propagated certain plants, like chestnut trees, near their settlements, a kind of early horticulture. You grin at the thought, prehistoric humans practicing guerrilla gardening, centuries before we invented grocery stores or seed packets. Nuts and berries aren't just food. They're tools for survival, shaping the rhythm of life across seasons. You watch as a man tosses a handful of acorns into a woven basket, testing their ripeness, while a dog-like animal noses the basket in hopeful anticipation. You trace your fingers along a low branch, pulling down ripe berries and popping a few into your mouth. Sweet, tart, and earthy, they instantly connect you to the landscape. The Jomon people likely knew dozens of edible plants and could identify medicinal herbs by smell, touch, or taste. You bend to examine a leafy sprig and wonder whether it's an herbal remedy, a seasoning, or just an accidental snack. Scholars still debate which plants were deliberately used for medicinal purposes versus dietary staples, leaving a lot of room for imagination. The forest canopy above filters sunlight into shifting patterns, making the ground seem alive. You notice footprints in the soft soil, probably left by deer or wild boar, and imagine families quietly stalking game or following trails to avoid disturbing the ecosystem too much. Some evidence suggests that the Jomon may have used small controlled burns to clear underbrush, making foraging easier, a risky but clever tactic that shows an intimate understanding of their environment. You raise an eyebrow, thinking, yeah, don't try that in your backyard today. Bird calls change pitch as you wander deeper, signaling your proximity to a river. Here the foraging shifts, freshwater shellfish, edible roots, and aquatic plants supplement the forest harvest. You kneel by the water, feeling the cool mud between your fingers, and notice tiny impressions of shells embedded in the bank. Someone long ago collected them, perhaps for food or tools, leaving a trace of their routine behind. The diversity of the forest and riverside life ensures a steady diet, but only for those attuned to its rhythms, much like you're beginning to feel, crouched among roots and reeds. A fringe observation: some Jomon settlements include small stone arrangements in the woods, possibly marking gathering grounds or planting spots. You tiptoe around one, imagining it as a prehistoric signpost. Best acorns this way, or beware, wild boars ahead. The line between practical and symbolic is blurry, leaving plenty of room for speculation. You brush a hand over the mossy stones, feeling a strange connection across millennia, as if someone had left a whisper for you to find. As the sun shifts, you notice families emerging from pit houses with woven baskets, heading into the forest in choreographed motions that seem spontaneous but are actually steeped in experience. Children mimic their elders, learning the songs of the forest, how to recognize which plants are ripe, which roots are toxic, which birds signal rain. The knowledge is subtle, passed quietly, without books or lectures, yet it carries the weight of centuries. You pick a few berries to taste and chuckle softly at your own clumsiness, remembering the tiny clay pot you admired yesterday. It's all connected. Tools, containers, food, knowledge. By late afternoon, the forest is alive with movement. The scraping of sticks, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional shout of delight as a child finds a prize berry. You lean back against a tree, listening, imagining the forest as a living classroom, one that teaches patience, observation, and the joy of small victories. The Jomon foragers aren't just surviving, they're celebrating life in quiet, mindful ways, their routines harmonizing with the forest's own pulse. You inhale deeply, carrying the smell of moss, berries, and warm earth, and let the subtle magic of daily life here settle over you. You step onto the pebbled bank of a gently flowing river, and the first thing that strikes you is the constant, soothing murmur of water over stone. It's a lifeline for the Jomon people, a source of fish, a corridor for small game, and, occasionally, a playful hazard if you're not paying attention. You watch a man with a long wooden spear crouch near the water's edge, eyes sharp, muscles coiled like a spring. A small school of fish glints beneath the surface, unaware of the fate that might befall them. Hunting and fishing here is a patient, almost meditative practice, balancing skill with timing and occasionally dumb luck. Historians still argue whether Jomon people specialized in certain prey or took a more generalized approach. You bend down to feel the smooth stones, imagining how they might have been used to grind shells or crush nuts, or as weights for primitive fishing nets. Someone nearby dips a woven trap into the shallows, the rhythmic splash blending with bird calls. You notice a fringe trick. Some river traps seem designed to startle fish into a corner using gentle noise, a clever tactic that's been debated among archaeologists since no written record exists. You grin, imagining Jomon people whispering to fish like old, patient magicians. A sudden rustle draws your attention to the forest edge. A small family moves through, carrying freshly caught rabbits in woven baskets, their movements quiet but purposeful. Hunting small game is about patience, tracking, and subtle signs in the undergrowth, broken twigs, scat, faint trails. You crouch and pick up a discarded bone, worn smooth from use, perhaps a tool, or just a remnant of a meal. It's fascinating to think that even ordinary bones had multiple roles, tool, ornament, or lesson in anatomy for the children trailing behind their elders. By mid-morning, the smell of smoked fish drifts along the riverbank. Some Jomon people construct small, smoking racks using stones and sticks to preserve their catch. You lean closer, noticing the gentle curl of smoke and the golden brown sheen of drying fish. There's a certain artistry in this preservation, a mix of utility and instinct, honed over generations. A fringe historical suggestion posits that some smoked fish were used in early fermentation experiments. Archaeologists aren't sure, but it's fun to imagine ancient sushi brewing centuries before anyone called it that. The forest and river intertwine in a rhythm that dictates daily life. You step into shallow water and feel smooth pebbles beneath your feet, imagining children learning to wade while elders teach net casting. Stone weights and bone hooks glint in the water, reminders of the careful experimentation that allowed these people to thrive. You notice a trap hidden among rocks, expertly camouflaged, and can almost hear a father whispering instructions to a child. Patience, patience, the river teaches you everything. Quirky tools catch your eye, a small bone harpoon, decorated with faint incisions, both functional and oddly aesthetic. You pick it up, turning it in your hand, and can almost hear the jokes a Jomon teenager might make while testing it on a stick. Don't miss the fish, or you'll owe me dinner. Humor, even in survival, is timeless. Historians still debate the full range of tools used for hunting and fishing, especially in more experimental sites. There may have been dozens of ingenious implements lost to time, leaving us to reconstruct the methods from shards and fragments. As the sun warms your shoulders, you follow the river upstream. You notice small rock weirs, crude channels, and depressions where fish were likely guided into waiting hands. Every arrangement seems simple, yet it's obvious someone thought long and hard about flow, timing, and behavior. A fringe note: some researchers suggest certain weirs may have also served ceremonial purposes, like small offerings to river spirits, though there's no conclusive proof. You chuckle at the thought, catching dinner and making the gods happy simultaneously. Efficient multitasking. You pause on a grassy bank and watch the interplay of daily routines. A woman checks a trap, a child flings a small stick into the water, and a dog-like animal wades in, eyes bright and tail wagging. The Jomon's connection to the land is intimate, a careful balance of observation, trial, and creativity. Even the tiniest action, like the placement of a stone or the tension of a net, carries a weight of knowledge built over centuries. You dip a hand into the cold water, imagining the lives of those who did this every day, learning from mistakes, celebrating small victories, laughing quietly at each other's errors. By afternoon, the banks are dotted with the quiet signs of life: drying fish, carefully stacked stones, tracks of small game, and the rhythmic movement of families engaged in survival, art, and play. You step back, watching smoke curl toward the treetops, hearing the occasional splash of a catch. You realize that hunting and fishing aren't just about food, they're about rhythm, learning, and weaving yourself into the pulse of the environment. And as you imagine the Jomon children giggling as they test their first traps, you feel a subtle, timeless connection to these early humans who mastered patience, ingenuity, and a little bit of luck to thrive along the rivers and forests of ancient Japan. You step back from the river and glance at the clusters of pit houses nestled among the trees, sun-dappled and smoke-stained, each a small testament to the ingenuity of the Jomon people. The houses are half sunken into the earth, circular or oval, with gently sloping roofs thatched from reeds and grasses. You kneel to trace the edge of a compact doorway, the smooth stones forming its threshold cool beneath your fingers. Living here feels grounded, literally, the floor of the house pressed into the soil, walls wrapped around you like a protective embrace. Historians still debate whether the sunken design was primarily for insulation, defense, or ritual reasons. You tiptoe inside a particularly well-preserved dwelling, noting the central hearth, blackened from centuries of cooking fires. The smell of smoke lingers faintly, mixed with earth and moss. Small clay pots and baskets lie near the walls, reminders of the rhythm of daily life. You imagine the low, murmur-filled mornings, children shuffling about, elders carefully tending fires, and the occasional playful scolding. There's a quirky detail here. Some pit houses include tiny, mysterious side chambers whose purpose is uncertain. Storage? Ritual? Secret hideaways for kids? No one can say for sure. The walls themselves tell stories. Stones line the base to prevent erosion, while wooden posts support the roof, and patches of clay seal gaps. You run your fingers along the rough surfaces, imagining a young builder pressing, smoothing, and shaping each section with care, the sun warming their back. Evidence suggests that these houses could last for decades with regular maintenance, yet the layout seems flexible, easy to adapt for growing families or seasonal changes. The ingenuity is subtle: vents for smoke, elevated sleeping areas, and drainage cleverly incorporated to prevent water accumulation. You crouch to examine the floor, noticing shallow depressions where mats were laid and small pits likely used for storage. Some houses show evidence of ceremonial spaces, perhaps used for seasonal observances or ancestor rituals, though scholars still argue about the specifics. You smile at the thought of a Jomon family, quietly arranging stones or figurines just so, whispering prayers or jokes, a combination of daily routine and spiritual expression. Fringe evidence suggests that in some areas, pit houses may have been linked with astronomical observation, using roof openings or post alignments to track the sun, practical, ritualistic, and somehow poetic. The exterior of the houses is equally fascinating. You notice faint tracks leading to communal areas, gardens, and river paths, showing the careful planning of space. Roofs are steep enough to shed rain, but low enough to retain heat. Some communities built houses close together for warmth or protection, while others spaced them apart to follow seasonal food sources. A child's laughter echoes across the settlement as they dart between homes, carrying a small stick as if it's a ceremonial staff. You can almost feel the subtle social choreography, pathways, meeting spots, and private corners designed for daily life, yet imbued with a sense of rhythm. You imagine the construction process: digging the pit, setting posts, weaving the roof, applying clay, and tending fires to cure materials. The teamwork involved is immense yet fluid, a choreography passed down from parent to child. Even small decisions, like the thickness of walls or the orientation of the entrance, reveal knowledge honed over generations. The Jomon people seem to have viewed architecture not as a static structure, but as a living, evolving part of their environment, each house interacting with sunlight, wind, and community movement. A fringe note: some pit houses contain depressions in the floor that archaeologists suggest may have been used for fermenting foods, storing water, or even small ritual fires. The truth is murky, but it's fun to imagine a family brewing prehistoric tea or experimenting with early sources while the wind rustles through the reeds above. You kneel, picturing yourself tucked into a corner, the smell of smoked fish in the air, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional squeak of small animals exploring the periphery. By late afternoon, sunlight slants across the settlement, illuminating the textures of walls, smoke, and earth. You notice subtle variations between houses, some larger, some smaller, some more elaborately decorated with clay appliques or cord-marked patterns. These differences hint at family status, functional requirements, or perhaps just personality, the quirks of humans preserved in architecture. You lean against a post and close your eyes briefly, imagining generations of families performing the same routines: cooking, repairing, weaving, telling stories, playing games. The pit houses are more than shelter. They are the heartbeat of Jomon life, embracing both practicality and subtle artistry, shaping daily life while adapting gracefully to the natural world around them. You step away from the earthy pit houses and wander toward a small clearing where smoke rises in gentle spirals from carefully placed fire pits. The air feels charged, not with electricity, of course, but with the quiet weight of ritual and memory. Tiny clay figurines, dogu, rest near the hearths, some human-shaped, others abstract and enigmatic. You crouch to examine one, noting its exaggerated eyes and delicate incisions. Historians still debate whether these figures represented fertility, protection, healing, or just whimsical expressions of creativity. You tilt your head and imagine a Jomon elder holding this figurine, murmuring quiet words. perhaps asking the spirit of the forest to watch over the family. A quirky observation: some dogu have tiny detachable parts, like movable limbs or heads, suggesting they may have doubled as playthings for children or tools for teaching complex ideas. You grin at the thought. Prehistory meets a little bit of ancient toy-making. The figurines' variety is astonishing. Some are small enough to hold in one hand, others nearly a foot tall, with elaborate patterns mirroring those on pottery. Every piece seems to embody both the mundane and the sacred, bridging daily life with the mystical. You notice shallow pits encircled by stones, sometimes with remnants of shells, seeds, or ash. These seem to be ritual sites, perhaps offerings to spirits or the ancestors themselves. Historians still argue whether all Jomon ceremonies were tied to fertility, seasonal cycles, or entirely lost belief systems. You squat beside one, running a fingertip across a small heap of carefully arranged stones, feeling the intentionality behind each placement. A subtle breeze stirs the smoke and leaves, carrying the faint scent of burned herbs, a smell both comforting and mysterious. A fringe tidbit: some scholars have speculated that Jomon people may have staged miniature symbolic landscapes with stones, figurines, and clay models to represent the wider world, an early attempt at storytelling in 3 dimensions. You imagine an elder arranging tiny figurines to teach a child about the cycles of nature, the movements of animals, or human responsibility to the land. There's a gentle humor in imagining prehistoric classrooms set in smoke-filled clearings, with lessons delivered in gestures and soft murmurs rather than words. You wander deeper into the clearing and see a group seated around a central fire, their movements slow, deliberate. Some tend the flames, others pass small clay vessels, possibly containing herbs or fermented nuts. You notice a young person carefully pressing a chord pattern into a clay disc, the hands steady, almost meditative. Ceremonial or not, the act carries a rhythm familiar from daily life: repetition, attention, and connection. The Jomon didn't separate the spiritual entirely from the practical. They seem to have merged them seamlessly, finding ritual in cooking, crafting, and caring for each other. The forest around you hums with quiet life, echoing the energy of the rituals. Birds, insects, and small mammals watch from hidden perches, part of the invisible audience to these ceremonies. Some rituals seem tied to natural phenomena: the first ripening of chestnuts, the migration of fish, the cycles of the moon. Fringe evidence even hints at temporary ceremonial structures or small wooden posts arranged in celestial alignments, though no one can confirm their exact meaning. You squint, imagining the Jomon peering skyward, tracing patterns, perhaps whispering, "We see you, stars." As you linger, you notice the subtle integration of ceremony into everyday life. Fire pits serve as cooking areas by day, ritual focal points by night. Stones may act as seats or altars. Clay vessels hold food or symbolic offerings. You can almost hear the soft laughter, low songs, and whispered prayers overlapping with practical sounds. The scraping of a stone tool, the rustle of reeds, the occasional bark of a dog-like companion. Rituals are not separate spectacles, they are woven into life's fabric, reinforcing connections between humans, environment, and unseen forces. By mid-afternoon, sunlight slants through the trees, illuminating the smoke spirals and casting the figurines into sharp relief. You pick up a small dogu, feeling the cool, textured clay, and imagine generations of hands passing it along, adding patterns, mending cracks, infusing it with intent. Even the smallest objects hold stories, beliefs, and mysteries that persist centuries later. You exhale slowly, feeling a quiet reverence for the unseen lives around you. The laughter, the chants, the subtle rituals that bind people to each other and to the world they inhabit. It's intimate, layered, and gently magical. A reminder that spirituality in the Jomon period is less about doctrine and more about rhythm, connection, and observing the delicate balance of life around you. You wander back toward the settlement's heart, where tools lie scattered near pit houses, some freshly made, others worn smooth from centuries of handling. Stone axes glint faintly in the sunlight, polished by countless hands. Bone awls and fishhooks rest beside small piles of sharpened shells. Picking one up, you feel the weight, balanced yet precise, and can't help but admire the ingenuity of someone who shaped survival out of rock and bone. Historians still debate the full range of Jomon technologies. Some tools appear almost experimental, suggesting trial and error innovations that never quite made it into everyday use. A quirky detail catches your eye. Certain bone implements have tiny notches or decorative carvings, which may have served as counting aids, ceremonial markers, or simply whimsical doodles. You grin, imagining a Jomon teenager leaving little messages in the tool like prehistoric graffiti. Tools are not just functional objects, they're also expressive, carrying hints of personality, humor, and artistry. Even stone axes are subtly different in shape and balance from region to region, hinting at local preferences and hand techniques. You crouch by a pile of obsidian blades, marveling at the skill required to flake the stone into razor-sharp edges. These blades are both fragile and deadly, and the Jomon people knew exactly how to wield them without injury. Some blades are simple and practical, others delicate enough to carve intricate designs into wood or bone. Fringe evidence suggests that some may have been used in symbolic or ritual contexts, rather than purely for survival. You hold one up, turning it in the sunlight, and imagine it slicing through fish, shaping cordage, or even serving as a prestige object traded between distant villages. Nearby, bone and antler tools hint at specialized crafts, awls for weaving, needles for leather, harpoons for fishing. You notice a child practicing with a small, blunt bone tool, attempting to pierce a thin piece of bark. A gentle chuckle escapes you, imagining the same exercises repeated across generations, hands learning subtle techniques through trial and patience. The sophistication of these implements is remarkable, considering they were made without metal or modern sharpening tools. Historians still argue over whether some of the more complex tools were locally produced or imported from distant areas, as traces of non-local materials have been found in several settlements. You pause by a stone grinding slab, rough under your fingertips, used for processing nuts, grains, and pigments. Some slabs bear faint grooves, worn deep by repetitive motion, evidence of countless meals and creative projects. A fringe tidbit, researchers speculate that some stones may have been used for music or rhythmic rituals, tapping or scraping to produce sound during ceremonies. You chuckle softly, imagining a Jomon drum circle before dinner, the ancestors grooving to primitive beats while fish smoke in the background. As you explore, you notice the careful selection of materials: dense, resilient stones for axes, flexible, sharp bones for needles, strong reeds, and cord for weaving. The Jomon people clearly understood the strengths and weaknesses of each resource. You imagine a workshop in the afternoon sun, children learning the art of tool-making, elders instructing quietly, and small experiments turning into innovations. Each strike, scrape, and polish embodies knowledge and intention, transmitted through observation, imitation, and subtle correction. You step over a shallow trench where tools were sharpened and repaired. Some blades show signs of repeated flaking, suggesting a long life and the constant attention of their owner. You notice tiny chips and cracks repaired with bitumen or cord bindings, a kind of prehistoric multitasking. Keep the tool functional, make it last, and maybe even embellish it slightly. Fringe evidence hints that some Jomon artisans may have experimented with early composite tools, combining stone, bone, and cord for multi-purpose functionality, though this remains speculative. By late afternoon, you survey a small cluster of families using tools across the settlement, sharpening blades, hollowing wood, scraping hides, and shaping clay. Even the simplest implement carries layers of knowledge, creativity, and adaptation. You pick up a small awl and trace its edge with a fingertip, marveling at the continuity of human ingenuity. In this quiet, intimate moment, you feel connected to the countless hands that shaped life here. The patience, the creativity, and the joy embedded in even the humblest tools. The Jomon people weren't just surviving, they were inventing, experimenting, and leaving traces of themselves in every carefully shaped stone, bone, and shell. You wander along a narrow trail that winds between clusters of pit houses, noticing small piles of shells, polished stones, and carefully wrapped bundles. These are more than random collections, they're clues to the networks connecting distant Jomon settlements. Trade isn't grand or formal, but it exists. Obsidian from far-off volcanic regions, jade beads, shells from coastal areas carried inland. You hold a tiny obsidian blade, marveling that it may have traveled dozens, even hundreds of kilometers before resting in this village. Historians still argue over the extent of these exchanges. Were they rare treasures or a common part of daily life? A quirky observation, some shells used as trade items bear intricate carvings, perhaps personal signatures or playful doodles meant to entertain the recipient. You chuckle, imagining a Jomon teenager leaving their mark on a prized shell before gifting it across villages. The Jomon clearly understood value beyond mere survival. Objects could carry status, stories, or humor. You follow the faint tracks of other travelers, a woman's footprints beside a river, a dog-like animal padding silently, a child's hurried steps clutching a small bundle. Objects and messages move along these trails with purpose, yet the evidence is subtle. Fringe theories suggest that certain stone arrangements along paths may have served as markers or boundary signs for trading routes, but no definitive proof exists. You imagine generations of travelers whispering instructions to children, follow the river until the bent pine, then turn east, creating informal but enduring knowledge networks. As you reach a clearing, you notice several families exchanging goods: baskets of dried fish for small obsidian knives, carved shells for rare seeds, clay figurines for woven cord. The interactions are quiet, ritualized, yet flexible. You imagine someone joking, "I'll trade you this fish if you throw in a better dogu," laughter mingling with the gentle hum of the forest. Trade is more than economics. It's social glue, linking communities across landscapes, building relationships, and sharing innovation. Historians still debate how formal or casual these exchanges were, but the evidence of long-distance connections is undeniable. A fringe tidbit: some Jomon settlements may have marked paths with subtle carvings on trees or stones, a sort of prehistoric GPS. You smile at the idea, a parent teaching a child to navigate, leaving tiny, cryptic signs to follow safely, while also signaling that this path is ours. It's ingenious, playful, and practical all at once. You notice seasonal patterns in movement. Certain obsidian types arrive just before winter, perhaps for tool repair, while shells and beads appear in spring, accompanying festivals or ritual gatherings. You imagine a caravan of travelers, baskets balanced on shoulders, children balancing stones on their heads for fun, and elders quietly observing. These networks aren't just about goods, they're knowledge highways, carrying stories, techniques, and ideas. Near the riverbank, you spot a small stone cairn, its purpose unclear. Could it mark a trade route, a ritual boundary, or simply a pile of stones left by an imaginative child? Fringe speculation aside, It's evidence of conscious human effort shaping space for interaction. You bend to run your fingers along its surface, feeling the weight of countless unseen hands, the faint residue of centuries of footsteps and whispered instructions. By afternoon, you see families returning from journeys, baskets lighter or heavier depending on exchanges, children chattering about discoveries, elders smiling at successful trades. The settlement thrives not in isolation, but in connection, shared resources, knowledge, and occasional playful negotiations. You pause, taking in the rhythm of exchange, the gentle push and pull of communities linked across terrain, and realize that even in a time without roads or written language, the Jomon people built networks as vital and vibrant as any urban market centuries later. You feel the first hints of seasonal change as you walk through the Jomon village, the air cooler and heavier with the scent of damp earth after a morning drizzle. Leaves crunch underfoot, and you notice subtle shifts in behavior. Families are preparing for colder nights, children gather nuts and berries with extra care, and elders check the insulation of pit houses. Seasonal rhythms govern nearly everything: food storage, hunting, fishing, and even the placement of tools. Historians still debate how rigidly Jomon communities followed these cycles versus improvising based on weather and immediate needs. A quirky observation: some scholars suggest that Jomon people may have used simple leaf mats or clay inserts to adjust their pit houses for winter or summer, effectively creating tiny climate control systems without knowing thermodynamics. You chuckle, imagining an early DIY hack guide. Step 1, add extra reeds. Step 2, sip tea. Step 3, survive. You watch a woman layering leaves and moss over the edges of her home, her hands practiced and careful, her face serene in the afternoon light. The river reflects shifting skies, swollen from recent rains, and you notice children cautiously testing shallow crossings, their laughter mingling with the sound of rushing water. Adults stand nearby, tracking seasonal fish migrations, adjusting nets and traps, teaching the next generation the subtle signs of water flow and behavior of prey. Some of these techniques are obvious, but others remain mysterious. Archaeologists still puzzle over the precise timing and placement of certain traps and channels. Fringe theories even suggest some seasonal adjustments had ceremonial significance, tied to the planting and harvesting of symbolic plants or ritual offerings. In the forest, nuts and berries begin to change color, signaling readiness for harvest. You kneel, picking up a handful of glossy acorns, feeling their smooth weight, imagining them crushed for flour or roasted over a fire. You notice subtle arrangements, piles of gathered food near pit houses, carefully separated by type, indicating both knowledge of nutrition and practical preservation. Families work in tandem, synchronizing efforts like a quiet, efficient orchestra. A tiny, odd detail: some acorns were intentionally stored with leaves or moss, perhaps as a primitive pest deterrent or flavor experiment. Historians still aren't sure. You glance toward the hills, where smoke rises from communal fires. Seasonal festivals may accompany these changes, though the evidence is fragmentary. You imagine gatherings of families around fires, sharing the day's harvest, singing, or telling stories to pass down wisdom. The forest and river dictate a rhythm that is both practical and social. Even children learn early. They understand which berries are safe, which fish migrate when, and how the land responds to sudden storms. A fringe tidbit: some researchers propose that certain Jomon communities deliberately relocated pit houses seasonally, moving closer to rivers during spring and inland during harsh winters. You smile at the logistical challenge, packing up homes, baskets, and tools, only to set them up again. Humans, ever inventive, ever adaptable. The seasonal cycle isn't just survival, It's an ongoing dialogue with the environment, teaching observation, patience, and flexibility. You pause at the riverbank, watching a lone fisherman adjust his trap as clouds gather. You notice subtle signs of preparation, reeds collected for insulation, extra food stored near hearths, small tokens of ritual tucked under stones or alongside dwellings. Even minor behaviors, like adjusting the angle of a roof or rotating a drying rack, reflect intimate knowledge of environmental cycles. The village hums with quiet activity, a delicate ballet synchronized with wind, rain, and the slow march of the sun. By late afternoon, the landscape is bathed in golden light. Children chase each other, baskets swinging from their arms, while elders inspect food caches and check nets. The air smells of wet soil, drying leaves, and smoke, a mixture signaling both change and continuity. You realize that the Jomon didn't merely survive the seasons, they moved with them, learning, adjusting, and sometimes even celebrating nature's unpredictable patterns. Every shift, from monsoon to frost, shapes their routines, creativity, and ingenuity, leaving subtle traces that persist across centuries. And as you breathe in the crisp, evolving air, you feel the steady pulse of a people perfectly attuned to the cycles around them, living with rhythm, intelligence, and a touch of quiet magic. You wander into a quieter corner of the settlement, where small bundles of shells, bones, and carved stones hint at the Jomon people's fascination with personal adornment. Jewelry isn't just decoration here, it's identity, playfulness, and perhaps subtle social signaling. You notice necklaces made from tiny pierced shells, bracelets of carved bone, and beads of polished stone. Historians still debate whether these were everyday wear, ceremonial garb, or both. You hold a smooth jade bead in your hand, imagining a child stringing it carefully onto a cord while humming softly. A simple act connecting generations, play, and artistry. A quirky detail. Some figurines and beads have tiny scratches that suggest deliberate personalization, perhaps initials, symbols, or even jokes. You grin, picturing a Jomon teenager leaving a hidden mark for friends to find, a prehistoric Easter egg of sorts. Adornment isn't limited to jewelry. Evidence hints at body decoration, possibly tattooing or painting, though the specifics remain elusive. Fringe theories suggest temporary pigments made from crushed minerals or plant dyes could have been applied during festivals or rituals, adding bursts of color to everyday life. You notice children experimenting with small ornaments, threading shells and beads into miniature necklaces, learning dexterity and artistic sensibility while engaging in quiet play. The repetition of making, wearing, and gifting these items embeds both practical skills and social norms. You imagine a parent teaching a child, balance the beads, feel the weight, respect the materials. Even something as small as a string of shells becomes a lesson in aesthetics, patience, and social connection. Nearby, an elder arranges figurines and jewelry near a central hearth, perhaps for display, perhaps for ritual. Patterns on beads echo the cord markings of pottery, showing a deep cultural continuity. Some items are imported from distant regions, evidence of trade networks linking settlements, while others are crafted from local materials with ingenious techniques. Historians still argue how much of this artistry was purely ornamental versus functional or symbolic. You lift a carved bone bead, feeling its subtle grooves, imagining hands long gone polishing, drilling, and threading with meticulous care. A fringe observation, some ornaments seem to mimic animals or natural forms, suggesting early symbolic representation or personal totems. You smile, picturing someone wearing a tiny bear pendant or shell, shaped like a fish, perhaps to summon luck during hunting or fishing excursions. Personal expression and survival are intertwined, art, play, and practicality overlap, seamlessly in daily life. You wander past a drying rack where decorated vessels and small charms rest in the sun. You notice repetition in patterns, spirals, dots and lines that mirror natural forms, echoing the forests, rivers and celestial cycles. A young artisan delicately carves a new bead, tongue poking out in concentration, while a dog-like companion nudges another bead along the ground. Humor, experimentation, and creativity intermingle with the serious business of survival. By late afternoon, light slants across the settlement, illuminating ornaments, figurines, and carefully crafted tools. Children compare their collections, adults adjust cords and beads, and elders occasionally intervene with gentle corrections or tips. You pick up a tiny clay figurine, noticing traces of red pigment and cord impressions. Its presence tells stories about daily life, spirituality, and personal identity, bridging the gap between function and expression. Every ornament, every carefully strung bead reflects the subtle rhythm of the Jomon world, creativity, connection, and the quiet joy of making something meaningful with your own hands. You step back from the bustling work of tools, trade, and adornment to observe the subtle social rhythms of the Jomon village. At first glance, it seems informal. Families move freely, children dart between pit houses, elders sit quietly by hearths, and everyone tends to daily tasks. Yet a closer look reveals patterns, hints of social structure hidden in everyday life. Historians still debate whether the Jomon were strictly egalitarian or maintained subtle hierarchies based on age, skill, or ritual knowledge. You crouch by a fire pit, noticing an elder gently correcting a child's weaving technique, a blend of mentorship and quiet authority that seems central to community life. A quirky detail: some scholars suggest certain pottery or ornaments were reserved for particular family members or social roles, almost like badges of status or skill. You imagine a playful competition between adolescents, showing off their newest cord-marked pot or a perfectly strung necklace, laughter echoing through the pit houses. Social organization isn't formalized in written rules, but it is embedded in gestures, tasks, and small rituals, creating an unspoken web of responsibilities and respect. You observe families clustered together, forming units that share cooking fires, food stores, and tools. The layout of pit houses hints at relationships, proximity suggests alliances, shared labor, or kinship, while slightly isolated dwellings may house newly formed families or specialized craftsmen. A fringe hypothesis suggests some clusters were temporary, shifting seasonally to follow resources, while still maintaining cohesion through shared practices. You watch a small group carry baskets of nuts back to a central cache, negotiating space and priority with subtle gestures, a quiet choreography of cooperation. Nearby, a teenager shows a younger child how to weave reeds into cord, hands guiding hands, teaching both technique and patience. Knowledge transfer appears as much social as practical. You notice subtle distinctions in toolmaking. Some axes have finer polish, certain awls are sturdier, and certain clay patterns appear only in select households. Scholars still argue whether these distinctions reflect family traditions, skill hierarchies, or purely personal preference. You lean against a post, imagining the unspoken codes that organize such a community, from who leads hunting parties to who teaches in the clearing near the river. A fringe observation: some Jomon communities may have had ritual leaders or shamans, adults who coordinated spiritual practices or seasonal ceremonies, though evidence is sparse and open to interpretation. You watch an elder arranging small stones around a fire pit, perhaps teaching, perhaps performing a minor ritual. Either way, the act communicates authority, knowledge, and connection. Children and adults alike observe and imitate, learning subtle cues about leadership and responsibility without needing explicit instructions. You meander past a communal area where families share cooking duties and exchange small gifts, observing a rhythm of reciprocity and mutual aid. Tasks are distributed intuitively. Adults who are skilled hunters check traps, elders prepare storage pits, younger members assist, and everyone participates in the collective well-being. Social cohesion here is reinforced by repetition and observation rather than rigid rules. Even laughter, teasing, and playful rivalry have functional roles, subtly regulating relationships and strengthening bonds. By mid-afternoon, patterns of movement reveal underlying structure. Certain elders oversee fire maintenance, some children collect berries while others chase small animals, and artisans quietly work near their homes. The village hums with interdependent activity, each action reinforcing social cohesion. You notice a slight hierarchy emerging, not harsh or rigid, but present, like a soft current under calm water. Even in small gestures, the balance between authority, skill, and cooperation becomes apparent, showing a nuanced, living social structure woven into everyday life. The Jomon people weren't just surviving, they were maintaining relationships, transmitting knowledge, and negotiating roles through subtlety, observation, and shared rhythms. You feel that by watching closely, you're glimpsing a delicate dance of community life, one that balances individuality with collective harmony, curiosity with guidance, and playfulness with responsibility, a social network alive long before written rules codified human behavior. You wander toward the outskirts of the village, where the forest thins and the open plains beckon, offering a different kind of resource and challenge. Here, the Jomon people gather wild grasses, tubers, and medicinal plants, each step guided by generations of knowledge etched into memory. The air smells faintly of damp soil and crushed vegetation, carrying with it a sense of life beyond the settlement. Historians still debate how far these expeditions extended. Did families roam only a few kilometers, or did entire groups traverse tens of kilometers to follow seasonal resources? You crouch to examine a patch of roots, carefully noting their size and freshness, imagining the quiet calculation required to harvest sustainably. A quirky detail: some researchers suggest the Jomon may have planted wild plants by scattering seeds or partially buried tubers, a rudimentary form of proto-horticulture. You chuckle at the idea of prehistoric guerrilla gardening, planting a few carrots here, a cluster of chestnuts there, generations of humans subtly shaping the land without knowing the science behind it. Small fires dot the plain, used to clear underbrush or to drive game gently into nets or traps, demonstrating both ingenuity and intimate environmental understanding. Fringe evidence hints that some of these burns may have doubled as ritual cleansing or community gatherings, though the specifics are uncertain. You pause to watch a young forager test the soil, tapping and scraping with a small stone tool to loosen edible roots. A dog-like companion darts through the grasses, sniffing the air and signaling nearby animals. You notice the interdependence between humans and animals here. While hunting or foraging, companions may assist in locating resources, warning of predators, or carrying small bundles. Some archaeologists speculate these animals were semi-domesticated, a theory still under debate. The cooperation between species feels instinctive, a silent language developed over countless seasons. Nearby, elders instruct children in plant identification, gently pressing leaves to reveal subtle textures, explaining which are edible, which medicinal, and which to avoid. You bend closer, feeling the soil under your palms, the slight vibration of insects moving below, the brush of wind carrying faint pollen. Every lesson is sensory, intimate, and immediately applicable. Fringe studies suggest that some plant clusters were left intentionally untapped, perhaps as experimental gardens to see how resources regrow or for ritual observances, though no definitive evidence exists. A small stream winds through the plain, its clear water reflecting sunlight like liquid glass. You notice fish jumping and birds swooping down, creating a dynamic tableau of life. Some Jomon foragers use this microhabitat ingeniously: small woven traps, stone arrangements to guide aquatic life, and strategic net placements all increase efficiency. You pick up a smooth stone, imagining it as a simple yet versatile tool, weight, hammer, or token for ritual. The simplicity and effectiveness of these methods remind you of the Jomon balance between practicality and ingenuity. Children scamper along the grassy expanse, carrying small baskets of berries, chasing insects, or practicing spear throwing under careful supervision. You smile, remembering the earlier observations of pit houses and riverbanks, realizing that daily life is a continuum: play, learning, survival, and ritual, all intertwined seamlessly. Some archaeologists argue whether certain activities like berry collection or small game hunting were primarily instructional, ritualistic, or simply survival. There's room for all three possibilities. By afternoon, the golden light spills across the plain, highlighting the diversity of flora and fauna. You watch as families regroup, comparing harvests, sharing techniques, and teaching subtle ecological knowledge to younger members. Even small differences, like the placement of a stone marker, the angle of a basket, or the timing of a fire, reflect accumulated wisdom. The Jomon are attentive observers, responsive to the land, and constantly adapting strategies for both efficiency and safety. You crouch beside a small patch of edible tubers, imagining someone centuries ago kneeling in exactly this spot, making similar choices, quietly laughing at minor mistakes, and marveling at small successes. There is a rhythm to these excursions, a balance between risk and reward, curiosity and caution, play and instruction. The plain is not just a resource but a living classroom, shaping human behavior, social cohesion, and knowledge transmission. You rise, brushing dirt from your hands, sensing the profound connection between people and environment, a network of survival, learning, and creativity, humming softly across the generations. You wander back toward the heart of the settlement, the sun dipping lower and casting long, golden shadows over the pit houses and smoke-wreathed clearings. The village hums quietly, children playing, elders mending tools, families preparing evening meals. Everything slows as twilight descends, and you notice the subtle changes in routine: fires are banked, baskets set aside, and animals herded closer for safety. Historians still debate exactly how the Jomon structured evening life. Was it strictly ritualized, or simply a natural winding down after a day of work? Either way, the pattern is evident. As light fades, activity softens, giving space for reflection, stories, and rest. A quirky observation: some evidence suggests that tiny clay lamps or shallow hearths were used not only for warmth and cooking, but also for small-scale night lighting, allowing families to continue craftwork or storytelling after dark. You grin at the thought of a Jomon family working by a flickering glow, children wide-eyed as elders recount tales of forest spirits or distant travels along rivers. The interplay of light, smoke, and shadows creates a cozy, almost magical ambiance, one that connects people to their environment and to each other. You notice the subtle social choreography of evening life. Tasks are distributed intuitively. Someone stokes the hearth, another organizes tools, a child gathers firewood. Laughter, quiet conversation, and the occasional playful squabble fill the air. Fringe evidence hints at early musical instruments, simple flutes, percussion sticks, used to accompany songs or rituals, though the purpose and prevalence remain uncertain. You imagine a soft melody weaving through the smoke-laden clearing, adding rhythm to the gentle cadence of domestic life. Near the river, nets are checked and stored, while small fires are tended to preserve the day's catch. Children practice weaving and cord-making near the warmth of pit houses, hands learning dexterity through repetitive motion. Some small charms, shells, and beads are polished or threaded, ready for the next day. Historians still argue whether evening crafting was primarily practical, ritualistic, or a combination of both. But the evidence suggests a seamless integration of work, play, and reflection. The sky deepens to rich indigo, and stars begin to twinkle above the forest canopy. You feel the subtle chill of approaching night as smoke curls lazily from hearths. The village seems to exhale, releasing the accumulated energy of the day into the cool air. A fringe observation: some pit houses may have been arranged to align with celestial events like solstices or lunar phases, hinting at observational astronomy embedded into domestic life. You look up and imagine generations of eyes tracing patterns, finding meaning, and connecting daily routines to the cosmos. As firelight flickers across walls and smoke-tinted air, you notice families settling in, mats adjusted, blankets arranged, animals lying nearby. The rhythms of daily life, hunting, gathering, crafting, trading, give way to quietude, reflection, and the subtle weaving of social bonds. Laughter softens, footsteps slow, and the village pulses gently in tune with the land. You sit quietly, inhaling the mixed scents of smoke, damp earth, and drying herbs, feeling the centuries-long continuity of care, ingenuity, and connection. By late evening, the settlement seems suspended between worlds, alive with subtle movement yet anticipating stillness, carrying the accumulated knowledge, rituals, and daily routines of countless generations. You feel a quiet reverence for the interplay of survival, creativity, and community, and a deep sense of intimacy with these people, whose lives were carefully balanced with rhythm, observation, and the natural world. The fires glow softly, shadows dance on earthen walls, and you sense the gentle pulse of life slowing, preparing for the restorative calm of night. The fires glow low now, embers softly breathing warmth into the cool night air. Smoke curls lazily upward, weaving patterns that seem almost alive, flickering across pit house walls and casting gentle shadows over sleeping mats. You settle beside the last warm embers, feeling the day's rhythms sink into your muscles, your mind attuning to the subtle pulse of the village as it exhales into stillness. The wind whispers through the trees, carrying faint scents of moss, dried herbs, and cooling earth, wrapping you in a gentle embrace. Around you, life slows. Children nestle into blankets. The occasional whisper or rustle of fur from a dog-like companion, reminding you of the quiet vigilance of creatures who share this space. Adults breathe deeply, hands resting, eyes tracing the glow of embers, letting memory and reflection mingle with the gentle warmth. Somewhere, a soft clink of a bead or the distant tap of a tool reminds you of the creativity that quietly persists, even as the day's tasks fade into night. Historians still debate the exact rhythms of these nightly routines, but the essence remains: care, connection, and a slow, shared exhalation. The forest beyond the settlement hums softly with life, an owl's distant call, the rustle of small animals in leaf litter, the steady whisper of the wind through branches. The world contracts gently, the pulse of the Jomon village mirrored in the steady cadence of your own breath. Embers glow a little brighter as if acknowledging your presence, and for a moment, past and present fold together. You feel the continuity of generations, the careful tending of fires, the soft laughter, the quiet teaching, the shared wonder at stars above. Let your eyes soften. Let the flickering light and smoky warmth guide you into stillness. The village sleeps. The forest listens. And now, as your own body unwinds and your thoughts drift toward dreams, the rhythm of life slows into a gentle, reassuring lull. Good night. Sweet dreams.